The Centre for Development and Enterprise is calling for the downsizing of the new cabinet. This comes ahead of the National Assembly's first sitting on Friday, and joining us to have this discussion is Bernstein, who's the Executive Director at the Centre for Development and Enterprise. Anne, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on Daytime Update.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
And I think the report that the CDE compiled is basically the academic version of what many people in society have been saying, that this cabinet needs to be downsized. We've heard our president in State of the Nation addresses in previous years saying the cabinet will be downsized, but we never really saw an actual downsizing of our cabinet. I guess let's start with the importance of downsizing it. Why?
Look, I think the cabinet and the presidency are really the executive of our government. They're the ones who've got to direct what hopefully will be a deepened reform agenda for South Africa to fix all our many challenges. And if you look at the size of the cabinet, currently at 30, we think it can be a lot less. We've put up a proposal to cut it to 20, but we're not saying this is the last word on this. We're saying, for instance, but the principle of cutting the cabinet down to size is important. We need to decide what our priorities are as a country, what urgently needs to be fixed, and get the very best people we can at the core of a new, more streamlined cabinet, which also has to be supported by a more effective presidency. The presidency's also grown because decisions haven't been made and all sorts of reasons. And we're saying the new government should clean house and should get a really excellent cabinet, a small one which is more collegial, where everybody must be committed to the reform agenda and where they have experience of how to manage large departments and get results.
So not only just downsizing it, but also getting the right people as well, correct, Anne?
Absolutely essential. The country is in crisis on very many fronts. We need to get really good people in place. Now, you've got to get good people in the cabinet and good processes and institutions to support the cabinet and the president. And then we've got to get results. So we need to get good data coming out on the implementation of policy, and that's why we certainly support Operation Vulindlela. We think it should be strengthened, should absorb the current Ministry of Monitoring and Evaluation, not get too big, but be totally focused on delivery of reforms and the metrics we need to assess how those reforms are doing. Are we getting the results we need?
And speaking of getting good people in those places as well, we know that we are in coalition season. So for different political parties, the good person may vary and may be contradictory depending on which side of the fence or which color you are wearing, which party member you belong to. How will then government of the 7th administration be able to navigate that? I mean, already there's contestation. There's a lot of talks about this government of national unity. There's already some murmurs of some political party leaders and senior leaders already touting certain ministries. For instance, the likes of the Patriotic Alliance's leader, Gayton McKenzie, who has made it abundantly clear that he would appreciate or like a position as a Minister of Home Affairs. Now, if everybody has their own person that they want to put forward, how are we going to make sure that it is actually the right people, but also we still reduce it?
Look, this is the president's prerogative. Once he's elected, he chooses the cabinet. And if he's got to do it, we did think about this. We've taken this into account that you might need to accommodate coalition partners. But the president has to set the tone. He has to say, I need people of excellence. I need people of experience. If you haven't been able to run a local authority, then it doesn't augur well for being able to run a large national department. And if you have a checkered history when it comes to money and distinguishing between the people's money and your own, we're saying these are criteria. So the president has the prerogative. He has to choose people that the parties give him, and he has to debate that, and he needs to say what criteria he's looking for. We're saying integrity, honesty, but also competence to do the job are absolutely vital. We're saying not all cabinet positions are of equal importance. The Minister of Finance is the most important member of the cabinet next to the president, and his or her word needs to be final. They need to be backed by the president, and when they say something is not affordable, that goes. So that's a very important position. The last point I'd make is that the president has the right to appoint 2 members of his cabinet who are not part of parliament. And we're saying this is an opportunity to be used wisely. Bring in talented, experienced leaders for critical portfolios from outside politics to see if they, or at least outside parliament, to kind of increase the leadership and expertise available in the cabinet, because we really are a country in crisis. And that needs to be borne in mind in all the discussions about positions and power and politics and what kind of government we get. CD is saying very strongly, you have to bear in mind we have a country in crisis to fix.
Yeah. When we look at coalition talks on a local government level, what we've seen since 2016, political parties really do go for position first kind of talks. And we'll have that metro if you leave the other metro, if you give us a speaker, then, and there's all this like towing and froing that happens. Now, when I think of that prerogative that the president has to elect ministers, 2 of those who are not part of the National Assembly, and the potential hazard or the potential conflict it may cause amongst those members of parliament who were sent there by the political parties, who were voted in for by South Africans as well, albeit the president's prerogative to be able to elect ministers, 2 of them, who are not part of any political party. And perhaps that would actually also benefit South Africans as well, because it'd be more objective than putting their party first. How do you then suggest they maneuver this terrain? Because it's quite a tricky one as well. They don't have a 2/3 majority as any party, let alone the ANC. So there's a lot of horse trading going along. And then we're going to also include this extra element of 2 ministers who are not part of the National Assembly that may not be received well by those parties who have been voted for by the South African voters.
Look, the president will be in charge, and the president needs to set the tone. The tone for the country is a commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law, which the president has done already, and this president has done already, and we certainly would back him in that. But when he's forming his cabinet, this isn't just about wheeling and dealing. We're saying, think about the national interest. We have to fix almost everything in South Africa, from passenger transport to the economy, to the dreadful unemployment rate, to our fiscal crisis, to the rule of law itself. So think about the country's interests, and the new president has to set the tone for that and bargain hard. There are many positions at his disposal. So it's not just the cabinet that is in play, but there are ambassadorships. There are all sorts of things you could use to appease political demands. So we're really saying it's a time for leadership, and leadership requires a commitment to reforming this country in the interests of everybody. The president has to set the tone. We've made practical proposals on a more efficient cabinet directed at reform priorities, and we've suggested ways to streamline the presidency to strengthen both the decision-making in cabinet, which has not been great, and the information on which they make decisions, the cluster process and the the institutions supporting the president, but all of this has to be in the national interest. So there are decisions to be made, there are lots of patronage to hand out, and this needs to be done wisely, but we're suggesting a cabinet geared around excellence and delivery on our reform priorities.
And part of your proposals, Anne, of this cabinet that's fit for purpose, as we've discussed, is to cut it down from 30 to 20. You do propose that there should be a combination in doing away of some ministries. If you could just elaborate on how that cabinet will be reduced from 30 or can be reduced from 30 to 20.
Look, these are our ideas after a lot of discussion with former civil servants and experts. But as I said, we're not going to fight to the wall for all of this. We think, as I've said, finance is a very important ministry, has to be a person of excellence and confidence between the president and the Minister of Finance. We're suggesting a sort of super ministry to deal with economic issues, which would include the DTIC, mining and tourism. And you could get synergies across these economic areas. Very important areas. Another big ministry would be transport and infrastructure, and the infrastructure for communications and technology, digital technology. That could be another person of excellence and competence to really get those issues fixed for the country. So there are a number of areas where you could combine things. We're also saying there's some ministries that should really be closed down or terminated. My personal least favorite ministry is the one which is responsible for women, youth, and people with disabilities. We think this is an issue that should concern every minister. I don't know why you need to focus on women in this way, but that should be part of every ministry's responsibility, and they should account for it. Are they treating women fairly? Are they dealing with the issues of discrimination on the basis of gender? That's for everybody. So we don't need a special ministry in that area. We're suggesting the Ministry of Small Business Development. This seems to us to be, it's been a very ineffective ministry. It needs, small business development is easy to say, but hard to do. We're going to make proposals in a sort of while, is one of our actions, on how you could deal with the money that government spends every year, billions and billions, supporting small firms. We don't really know how this money is spent. We're saying let's give it to the experts in our society, which are the private sector funds that specialize in supporting and growing small businesses so they can get bigger. And so that ministry should go. And there are a number of others that we think could be absorbed in other sort of units or ministries or should go. So we've come up with an idea. We want to start a debate about this, but we are saying we've got to focus on priorities. And that's why we've got some big ministries around critical areas that are essential for economic growth and much increased employment.
And thank you so much for the research that you have done there at CDE and also for joining us on Daytime Update to give us that information. That's Anne Brenthurst, who's the Executive Director at the Center for Development and Enterprise. Let's take a look at your headlines at this hour. The Electoral